I'm from the Cherokee tribe and I'm representing the Indians. My people and I took side with the British with the agreement that we would not be pushed any further than we are already being pushed westward. We feared that the colonists would drive us out of our land as they slowly expanded. This was when King George issued the Proclamation Line of 1763. The British authorities believed that they were closing off the frontier to any colonial expansion. King George told us Indians that the Appalachian Mountains and anything westward of them were ours. But what we came to realize was that they were pushing us back and confining us to one area. The motive behind the Proclamation Line was just to pen us in along the seaboard, where we would be easy to regulate. We were doing just fine before the French left us to defend for ourselves and defend our territory. The proclamation stated that the colonists could not take the off-limit land without a license or approval issued by the British officials. They just made the proclamation to silence us, knowing that there were ways to get around it and get the land that they wanted.
The first thing on the minds of us colonists was the great western frontier that had opened to us when the French ceded that contested territory to the British. The Royal Proclamation of 1763 did much to dampen our celebration. It closed off the frontier to colonial expansion. Unbelievable. The king felt that we, the colonists, would drive them from their lands as they expanded westward. We, the colonists, could not help but feel strong resentment when what we perceived to be our prize was snatched away from us. The proclamation provided all the lands west of the heads of all rivers which flowed into the Atlantic Ocean, from the west to the northwest of off-limits to us colonists.
They began to push for the land because they believed that they earned it from fighting in the battles. One of the reasons that the British confined us to a certain area is because we showed them that we did have power and defense by seizing several of their posts. But that's no excuse to push us into an area and letting it slowly taken away by colonists who happen to have been issued permits by the British authorities to be there. Ultimately, it was proved to be impossible for the British to control the western boundaries at the Proclamation Line. We were slowly but surely taken over and pushed away so we had to make many sacrifices. The Proclamation Line and their attempts to do it was one of the factors that eventually led to the American Revolution.
This included the rich Ohio Valley and all territory from the Ohio to the Mississippi rivers from the settlement. Relations are so poor between us and the Indians that few settlers would argue in public that the Indians had any rights at all. Establishing and manning posts along the lengths of this boundary was a very costly undertaking. From the American perspective, this amounted to a tax on us, the colonies, to pay for a matter of imperial regulation that was opposed to the interests of us, the colonies. It was a bitter pill indeed.
Colonists had no right to take land from the natives when Harrison wrote the Treaty of Fort Wayne, 1809. This treaty, which was quote-unquote accepted by native leaders, but in reality the natives were actually drunk when they signed this treaty, so it really can't count for anything. Harrison ignored the fact that the natives did not accept this treaty and took 3 million acres of land from them.
The Indians are clearly inferior to the white men. Those savages should be grateful that we are here. We've brought them horses, and that's done nothing but good for them, and they can farm much more easily with our equipment. And just because they're sick doesn't mean we gave them any diseases. I mean, we're clean people, and look at the way they're living. They're living on the land.
One tribe leader, Tecumseh, was disgusted by this action, and he banded together with other native tribes to show the colonists that the natives couldn't be pushed around and they had to respect them. Tecumseh's actions were known as Tecumseh's War. This later led to the War of 1812, which the natives unfortunately lost, and the white settlers eventually had their way with them.
And since they are living on the land, it shouldn't be that hard for them to move west. And we need the land. It's not like we're actually taking their home, because there are no Indians where the people settle, and they've signed treaties, so there's really no reason for them to complain.
Slaves would be tyrants, we're the chance theirs. Victor Hugo. I believe that we, the common American, have the right to enslave others. After all, they're just Africans. They are obviously inferior to us. The slave trade is no different than indentured servitude. Slaves and servants are transported from other countries to America. Here they are taken into the care of masters. They, like the servants, work for the plantation owners. So why is servitude any different than slavery? I'll tell you why. Because there are whites out there that believe that we are being racist.
Frederick Douglass once said, "The white man's happiness cannot be purchased by the black man's misery." Yet many white men are searching for happiness through slaves' misery. Why are we any different than a slave from Africa? The only difference between us and the slaves is our color. Every slave has feelings, love, and the right to freedom, but we, living in a free country, have denied them the right of freedom. Our slaves are forced to work every day, every year for us, forced to toil in the hot sun. The blacks are punished for even the smallest thing.
I'm patriotic. They just don't love America. They just need to realize that slavery increases the economy. I can't run my cotton plantation by myself. Poor farmers couldn't afford the very little but expensive cotton necessary for clothing. Well, I being patriot myself, I wanted to help them. So by increasing the number of slaves I own, I increased the amount of cotton we.
The British be taken from their villages in Africa and the West Indies. Then they are placed on an overpopulated and infested slave ship. Just on the trip to the Americas, nearly half of the slaves perish. When the slaves reach their destinations, families are sold, mothers and children are separated, and couples are forced to say goodbye. One by one, each African is presented and sold like an animal. Often, the slave is forced to toil on a plantation. Cruelty towards the slaves was common. Often, the slave's entire life was on a plantation. It was illegal for a slave to learn to read or write. Forced into ignorance, Negroes had no way to fight back and could be killed for running away. Slaves were soon forced into non-existence. Every person has a right to freedom. No person has a right to take away another person's freedom.
Therefore, I believe that slavery is good for America. It's not like the Negroes have feelings or anything. Anyone who is against slavery is against America.